The night air bit sharp and cold, the kind that seeps through layers of clothing and settles deep in your bones. Rain had fallen earlier, not hard but enough to leave the road slick and the ditches swollen with muddy water. A beat-up pickup truck sat crookedly on the shoulder of County Road 17, its hood propped open like a tired mouth, steam long gone, replaced by silence. Inside, a man sat behind the wheel, hands still gripping it tight, knuckles white. In the passenger seat, his 6-year-old son had curled up under a thin blanket, eyes half closed, shivering just a little. The engine had coughed, sputtered, and died about an hour ago. No warning, no strange noises, just a sudden stop like the truck had simply decided it was done. He tried everything, turning the key again and again, checking the gas, plenty left, even tapping the battery terminals with a wrench he kept under the seat. Nothing. The headlights still worked, casting weak yellow pools on the wet asphalt, but that was it. No life in the engine. No way to call for help. His phone had died hours earlier, and out here between the cornfields and the old Miller place, there was no signal anyway. He looked over at his boy. The kid hadn't complained once. Not when the truck stopped. Not when the cold started creeping in. He'd just pulled his knees to his chest and whispered, "Are we going to be okay, Dad?" "Yeah, buddy," he'd said, voice rough but steady. "We're going to be just fine," but fine felt far away. Home was 12 miles back. 12 miles of empty road winding past fields, a couple of barns, and one lonely gas station that closed at 8. It was already past 10. Walking wasn't ideal, especially not in the damp and dark, but staying put wasn't safe either. The road wasn't busy, but every now and then a car would whoosh by, tires hissing on wet pavement, headlights blinding for a second before vanishing into the distance. What if one didn't see them? What if the temperature dropped more? He couldn't risk it. He stepped out into the damp night, the cold hitting him like a slap. He walked around to the passenger side, opened the door gently, and scooped his son up. The boy was light, too light maybe, but solid in his arms. Without a word, he hoisted him onto his shoulders, just like he used to when they'd watch parades or look for birds in the tall trees. The kid wrapped his arms around his dad's head, fingers cold against his ears. "Hold on tight," he said. "I got you," the boy whispered back, voice muffled by his dad's jacket. He grabbed the blanket from the seat and draped it over his son's back, tucking the edges under his arms. Then he shut the truck door, leaving the keys in the ignition, hoping no one would mess with it, and started walking. At first it wasn't so bad. His legs were strong from years of standing, lifting, fixing. The rhythm of his steps felt familiar, like walking the length of his workshop. But after a mile, the weight on his shoulders began to settle deeper. After 2, his neck started to ache. By the 3rd mile, every breath came a little harder, and his boots squelched with every step, soaked through from puddles he couldn't avoid. Still, he kept going. He talked as they walked, not about the broken truck or the bills waiting at home, but about silly things. About the time they tried to build a treehouse and it collapsed the next day. About the fat squirrel that kept stealing birdseed from their feeder. About how when his son was a baby, he used to fall asleep only when being rocked side to side, never up and down. The boy laughed softly at that, his breath warm against his dad's ear. "Remember the fireflies?" the boy asked suddenly. "Yeah," he said, smiling a little. "You chased one for 20 minutes and then cried when it flew away. I wanted to keep it. You can't keep light, buddy. But you can watch it." The boy was quiet for a while after that, but his grip stayed firm. Every so often he'd ask, "How much farther?" And his dad would say, "Not far now," even when they were barely halfway. The road stretched on, dark and endless. No streetlights out here, just the moon, half hidden behind clouds, and the occasional glow from a farmhouse window far off in the fields. Once a dog barked in the distance. Another time an owl called from the woods near the creek. Otherwise it was just the sound of boots on wet gravel, their breathing and the wind rustling through dry cornstalks. His shoulders burned. His lower back throbbed. His feet felt like lead. But he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because stopping meant his son would get colder. Stopping meant doubt might creep in. The kind that whispers, "You're not enough, you can't do this, you've failed." He wouldn't let that voice win. Not tonight. He remembered his own father years ago carrying him through a snowstorm when their car got stuck. He'd been about the same age as his son now. He didn't remember much, just the feeling of being safe, high above the ground, wrapped in his dad's coat, listening to his heartbeat through the fabric. That memory pushed him forward now, step by heavy step. Around mile 8, his son started dozing off. His head lolled forward, then jerked back up. "Don't sleep," his dad said gently. "Tell me a story." "I don't know any good ones," the boy mumbled. "Make one up." "About a brave dog." "Or a robot who likes pancakes," the boy giggled. Then launched into a wobbly tale about a robot named Clank who ran a pancake stand on Mars. His voice grew stronger as he spoke, imagination lighting up the dark road. His dad listened, smiling even as his legs screamed for rest. By mile 10, the first hints of dawn began to show, a pale gray smudge on the eastern horizon. The air felt less sharp, the world slowly waking up. A milk truck rumbled past, slowing slightly as it passed them, the driver giving a small wave. His son waved back, suddenly alert. "Is that Mr. Henderson?" he asked. "Maybe," his dad said. "He's up early." They passed the old red barn with the crooked roof, the one they always called Grandpa's barn, even though neither of them had ever met the grandpa who built it. Then the turnoff to the Johnson place, then the creek bridge. Each landmark felt like a victory. When the familiar gravel driveway finally came into view, lined with the crooked fence he'd been meaning to fix for months, he almost cried. His house sat there, quiet and small, smoke curling from the chimney. Warmth waited inside, dry socks, hot cocoa, a real bed. He walked the last 100 yards slowly, savoring each step. At the porch, he carefully lifted his son down. The boy's legs wobbled a little, unused to standing, but he held onto his dad's hand tightly. "You carried me the whole way," he said, looking up with wide, tired eyes. "Yeah," his dad said, voice thick, "because you're worth every step." He unlocked the front door and they stepped inside, to warmth, to safety, to home. Outside, the broken truck sat miles away on a lonely road. But here, in this small house, everything that mattered was right where it belonged. And for now, that was enough. Life hadn't always been this hard. There was a time when the house felt full, not just with furniture and toys and laundry piled in the hallway, but with laughter, with music from the old radio in the kitchen, with the smell of something good simmering on the stove. Back then, mornings started with 2 cups of coffee on the table, not one. Evenings ended with someone to talk to after the boy was asleep. Someone who knew the weight of his silences and didn't try to fill them with noise. But that was before the accident. Before the phone call in the middle of a Tuesday that changed everything. Since then, it had just been him and his son, figuring it out day by day. Like 2 people learning to walk again after a long fall. He worked at the garage on the edge of town, 6 days a week, sometimes 7. He'd been there for over a decade, first as an apprentice, then as a full mechanic. People trusted him. He didn't cut corners. If a part needed replacing, he'd show you the old one, explain why it failed, and never push for something you didn't need. That honesty kept customers coming back, but it didn't always pay the bills fast enough. Money was tight, always had been, but after his wife was gone, it got tighter. He picked up extra shifts, fixed neighbors' lawnmowers on Sundays, even sold some of his old tools to cover the electric bill one winter. The truck, the same one now sitting broken on County Road 17, was 15 years old, held together by duct tape, hope, and his own stubbornness. He'd rebuilt the engine twice himself, replaced the brakes more times than he could count. Every rattle and groan it made, he knew like a song. But machines, no matter how loved, have limits. Now, with the truck gone, everything felt like it was slipping. His job depended on getting to the garage by 6 a.m. sharp. Without wheels, that wasn't happening. He'd already missed one day, today, and the owner, a gruff but fair man who'd known him since he was a teenager, had said, "Take care of your boy first." But kindness like that didn't last forever. Jobs were scarce, and someone else would be happy to take his place if he couldn't show up. At home, things were quiet. Too quiet sometimes. His son had gotten good at reading his moods. If he came in with his shoulders slumped, the boy would hand him a drawing or ask if they could build a fort in the living room. If he sat too long at the kitchen table staring at bills, the boy would climb into his lap without a word and rest his head on his chest, like he was trying to share his own heartbeat to keep his dad going. School was another worry. The bus didn't come down their road. It stopped a mile away at the main intersection. On days when the truck worked, he'd drive his son there and pick him up after work. Now, walking that mile each way in the cold with backpacks and winter coats wasn't safe for a 6-year-old. He'd already called the school to say his son might be late or absent until things settled. The secretary had been kind, but he heard the unspoken question in her voice. How long will settled take? Pride was a strange thing. It kept him from asking for help even when help might have been right next door. Old Mrs. Langley across the field had offered to drive his son to school more than once. I've got nothing but time, she'd said, waving a wrinkled hand. But he always said no, thanked her politely, and walked away feeling like he'd failed twice. Once for needing help and again for refusing it. He told himself he was protecting his son from worry. But maybe deep down he was protecting himself from feeling like less of a man, like less of a father. The house itself showed the strain. Paint peeled near the back door. The roof leaked a little when it rained hard, and he'd patched it with tar and plastic sheeting, but it wasn't a real fix. Inside, the couch had a tear he'd sewn with fishing line. The fridge hummed louder than it should, a sound that meant it wouldn't last much longer. Every broken thing felt like another weight on his chest. Yet for all that, there was love in that house. Real quiet, stubborn love, like the way his son saved half his peanut butter sandwich every day, in case you're hungry later, Dad. Or how he'd leave little notes on the bathroom mirror. You're the best fixer. Or how, when thunderstorms rolled in, he'd crawl into his dad's bed without asking, just needing to be close. Neighbors knew him as the quiet guy who fixed flat tires for free and never said much at the post office. They didn't know about the nights he lay awake listening to the furnace click on and off, wondering how he'd pay for groceries next week. They didn't see him counting change at the grocery store, putting back the cereal his son liked because it was 50 cents more than the plain kind. He wasn't bitter, just tired. Tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. Still, he showed up. Every morning he made breakfast, oatmeal most days, sometimes pancakes if they had eggs. He helped his son with his shoes, checked his backpack, kissed the top of his head before sending him out the door to wait for the bus a mile away. Then he'd walk back, brew another cup of weak coffee, and sit at the table planning how to get the truck towed, how to afford the repair, how to keep everything from falling apart. He'd started looking at used car listings online, using the library computer on his lunch break. Most were out of reach. Some were scams. One looked promising, a 2008 sedan, clean title, $2,500, but that might as well have been $1 million right now. He thought about selling the house. It wasn't much, but it was paid off. Maybe they could rent something smaller in town, closer to everything. But the idea of leaving, the porch where his wife used to drink her morning tea, the backyard where his son learned to ride a bike, felt like losing her all over again. So he stayed. He kept fixing what he could, kept walking when he had to, kept telling his son, "We're gonna be okay," even when he wasn't sure he believed it himself. What he didn't know was that someone had seen him that night. Someone who remembered the way he'd carried his son, not like a burden but like something precious. Someone who'd watched from a kitchen window, coffee in hand, and felt something shift inside. He didn't know that kindness, once noticed, has a way of spreading, like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. And those ripples were already moving toward him, quiet and steady, even as he sat alone at his kitchen table, staring at a stack of bills and wondering how much longer he could carry it all by himself. But for now, in this moment, there was only the ticking clock, the smell of yesterday's coffee, and the sound of his son's breathing from the next room, soft, even, safe. And that at least was something to hold on to. She'd been wiping down the counter at the diner when she saw them. Just a glimpse, really, through the big front window past the neon open sign flickering in the rain. A man walking slowly down the highway, shoulders hunched with a small boy perched on top like a little king surveying his kingdom. It was late, way past closing time, but she'd stayed late to finish inventory and the sight stopped her cold. At first she thought maybe it was a game. Kids ride on shoulders all the time. But this was different. The way the man walked, steady but heavy, like every step cost him something. The way the boy held on, not laughing or bouncing but quiet, wrapped in a blanket that looked too thin for the weather. And the road? It was County 17. Nobody walked that stretch unless they had no other choice. She watched until they disappeared around the bend near the old Miller place. Then she went back to counting napkins, but her mind wouldn't let it go. She kept seeing that image, the dark road, the hunched figure, the small shape on his shoulders. Something about it felt important, like witnessing something real in a world full of noise. The next morning, over weak coffee and burnt toast at her kitchen table, she mentioned it to her neighbor, the retired schoolteacher who lived 2 houses down and still read the paper every day front to back. "Saw a man walking last night," she said. "Had his kid on his shoulders. Looked like they'd been out there a while." The older woman frowned. "On County 17? In this weather? That's a long walk from anywhere." "I know," she said. "And no car in sight. Just them, alone in the dark." The teacher didn't say much then, but later that afternoon she was sitting on her porch with her binoculars, not spying, just keeping an eye on things like she always did, and she saw the same man walking back toward town, alone this time, boots muddy, shoulders slumped. She recognized him. He'd fixed her old Buick last spring. "Quiet fellow," always polite. Always looked tired, she asked around quietly. Found out his truck had broken down. Found out he was raising his boy alone. Found out he hadn't missed a day of work in 10 years. Until yesterday. That night she sat at her computer, fingers stiff from arthritis but determined. She didn't use social media much, but she knew the town had a Facebook group, Neighbors Helping Neighbors, started years ago during a bad ice storm. She typed out a short post. "Saw a local dad walking home last night on County 17 with his young son on his shoulders. Truck broke down. No phone, no help. He carried that boy for miles in the cold. If anyone knows who this is or wants to help, please speak up. Some folks carry more than we realize." She attached a photo she'd taken from her porch that morning. Blurry. Grainy, taken with an old phone, but you could see the man's posture, the way he held his son's legs to keep him steady. She hit post and went to bed, not expecting much. By morning, her phone was buzzing. First, a message from the woman at the diner. "That's him. I knew it." Then a comment from the gas station owner. "That's the mechanic from Hank's garage. Good man." Then another. "I saw them too. Thought about stopping but figured they didn't want trouble." And then came the offers. "I've got an old toolbox he can borrow. My cousin's got a spare tire that might fit his truck. Can someone organize a tow? I'll chip in for repairs." Within hours, the post had been shared over 200 times. People who'd never met the man were moved. Not by drama, not by pity, but by the quiet dignity of what he'd done. Carrying your child when there's no other way. Walking through the dark because you have to. Not complaining. Just doing what needs to be done. At the elementary school, the boy's teacher saw the post during lunch. She knew the family. Knew how the boy always had clean clothes, packed lunches, and homework done, even when his dad looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. She remembered how, during parent-teacher conferences, the man never made excuses. Just listened, nodded, and said, "I'll make sure he gets it." She started a GoFundMe that afternoon. Called it "Help a Hard-Working Dad Get Back on the Road." Wrote a simple description. This man walked 12 miles in the cold carrying his son because his truck broke down. He's a single father, a skilled mechanic, and someone who's always helped others. Now it's our turn to help him. She didn't ask for much. Just enough to cover a tow and basic repairs. But people gave more. A retired firefighter donated $100. A teenager gave $20 from his lawn mowing money. The owner of the hardware store matched the first $500. By dinner time, they'd raised over $200. No one made a big show of it. No cameras. No speeches. Just messages in the group chat. Dropped off a bag of groceries on his porch. Left. A gas card in his mailbox. Told Hank at the garage, said he'd hold the truck safe and look at it for free. The man himself had no idea any of this was happening. He was too busy trying to figure out how to get to work on foot, how to explain another absence, how to keep his son from noticing the worry in his eyes. He didn't check social media, didn't have time for it, so while the town quietly rallied around him, he sat at his kitchen table sharpening a screwdriver, thinking about selling his old welding gear. But kindness has a way of finding you, even when you're not looking. One afternoon, as he walked back from the bus stop after dropping his son off, he found a plain white envelope taped to his door. Inside was a handwritten note and a gift card to the auto parts store. The note said only, "For the man who carries his world on his shoulders, a neighbor." He stood there for a long time staring at the words. His throat tightened. He didn't cry, not yet, but something shifted inside him. Like a door he didn't know was closed had cracked open just a little. That same day, the diner waitress brought him a plate of pancakes during his lunch break, on the house. "Heard you like the blueberry ones," she said, not meeting his eyes. He thanked her, confused but grateful. Later, the school called. Not about his son, but to say an anonymous donor had paid his lunch balance for the rest of the year. He didn't understand. Who would do that? What he didn't know was that the ripples were growing. The story wasn't just about a broken truck anymore. It was about what happens when people see someone doing the right thing quietly without fanfare and decide to step up. Not because they expected anything back, but because it felt like the human thing to do. And the best part? None of it felt forced. No grand gestures. Just small acts. $10 here, a kind word there, a warm meal, a spare part, adding up to something bigger than any one person. The man still didn't know the full picture. But for the first time in a long while, as he walked home that evening, he didn't feel quite so alone. Someone had seen him. Someone had remembered. And in a world that often feels cold and fast, that meant more than he could say. He didn't know it yet, but the next morning would bring something even bigger. Something that would fill his driveway, his yard, and maybe even his heart. But for now, in the quiet of his kitchen, with his son coloring at the table and a full belly from pancakes he didn't pay for, he allowed himself to hope just a little that maybe things could get better. He woke to the sound of engines. Not one, not two, but many. A low, steady rumble that vibrated through the bedroom window and into the floorboards. At first, he thought he was dreaming. Maybe a truck convoy was passing on the county road. But the sound wasn't moving. It was parked. Right outside. He sat up slowly, heart thudding. His first thought was the worst one. Repo men. Maybe the bank had finally come for the house. Or worse, someone had seen the broken truck on the side of the road and reported it stolen. He'd forgotten to call the police about it. Forgotten a lot of things lately. He pulled on his boots and a flannel shirt, not even bothering with socks, and walked to the front window. He peeked through the gap in the curtains and froze. His gravel driveway was full. Not just full, overflowing. Trucks, SUVs, sedans. Even a couple of old farm pickups he recognized from down the road. They lined both sides of the lane, stretching all the way to the mailbox. And in the middle of it all, gleaming under the pale morning sun, sat a clean, white work van with a big red bow tied around the side mirror. He blinked. Rubbed his eyes. Looked again. People were standing in his yard. Not strangers in uniforms, but neighbors. The diner waitress, arms crossed, smiling. The retired school teacher holding a thermos. The gas station owner leaning against his truck. Even the quiet teenager who mowed lawns all summer stood there, shifting from foot to foot like he wasn't sure he belonged. And at the front of the group, holding a set of keys, was the owner of the garage where he worked. The man who'd let him take a day off without question. The man who'd known him since he was a kid with grease on his cheeks and dreams of fixing anything with wheels. He opened the front door, still half convinced this was some kind of mistake. The cold morning air hit his face, sharp and real. "Morning," the garage owner said, stepping forward. His voice was rough, like always, but softer than usual. What's all this?" he asked, glancing around, bewildered. "You walked 12 miles carrying your boy," the man said simply. "We figured you shouldn't have to walk again." Before he could respond, the crowd started moving, not toward him, but toward the vehicles. One man opened the back of his pickup to reveal tools. Wrenches, socket sets, even a brand new torque wrench still in the box. Another carried grocery bags. Milk, bread, eggs, peanut butter, the kind his son loved. A woman handed him an envelope. "That's for the electric bill," she said quietly. "Paid in full." Then the garage owner held out the keys. "That van's yours. Donated by a guy in the next county who saw your story online. Said he'd been in your shoes once. It's got low miles, new tires, and a warranty. And if anything ever goes wrong," he added with a small grin, "you know where to bring it." He took the keys. They felt heavy. Real. His hands shook. He looked past the van, past the people, and saw his son standing in the doorway behind him, eyes wide as saucers, pajamas rumpled, hair sticking up in every direction. The boy hadn't said a word. Just watched, mouth slightly open. Then, as if on cue, the crowd parted slightly and someone started clapping. Just one person at first, maybe the school teacher. Then another joined in. Then another. Soon the whole yard was filled with the sound of steady, warm applause, not loud or showy, just there, like a blanket wrapped around a cold morning. He didn't know what to say. Words felt too small for what he was feeling. So he just nodded once, then again, and then he turned and knelt down, pulling his son into a tight hug. "Is that for us, Dad?" the boy whispered, voice trembling with wonder. "Yeah, buddy," he said, throat tight. "It is." The boy ran out then, not to the van, but straight into the crowd, straight to the diner waitress, who scooped him up like she'd been waiting to do it all along. People laughed. Someone handed the boy a donut from a bakery box. Another gave him a toy truck. It wasn't about the gifts. It was about the feeling that he and his dad belonged here, that they were seen, that they mattered. Over the next hour, the yard filled with the sounds of real life. Coffee being poured from thermoses, stories being shared, tools being explained. The garage owner and 2 other mechanics walked over to the van, popping the hood to show him everything worked. "Fuel efficient," one said. "Plenty of room for your gear. And your boy." He kept touching the van's door like he was afraid it would vanish if he looked away. It smelled new inside, like plastic and leather and possibility. In the back, someone had already placed a child's car seat installed perfectly with a stuffed dog sitting in it. How did you all know?" he finally asked, looking around at the faces. "We saw you," the school teacher said gently. "Not just that night. We've seen you for years, fixing Mrs. Langley's gate, helping Mr. Ruiz jump his battery in the snow, never asking for anything, just doing what's right." He looked down at his boots, muddy, worn, the laces frayed. He'd walked so far in them, carried so much. And now here they were, carrying him. No one made a speech. No one took videos. This wasn't for show. It was just people, doing what people do when they see someone struggling but still standing tall. They stepped up. Not because they had to, but because they could. By mid-morning, most folks had gone, back to work, back to their own lives. But the van remained. So did the groceries. So did the envelope with the paid bills. And so did the feeling that something had changed, not just in his driveway, but inside him. Later, as he and his son sat on the porch steps eating donuts, the boy asked, "Does this mean we're rich now?" He smiled. "Nobody. It means we've got people who care." The boy thought about that for a moment. Then he said, "I like that better." He put an arm around his son's shoulders and looked out at the quiet road, the fields beyond, the van sitting like a promise in the driveway. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like a weight. It felt like a road he could actually walk, maybe even drive, without fear. And as the sun climbed higher, warming the wood beneath them, he realized something simple but true. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is let others help you carry the load. Life didn't suddenly become easy after that morning. Bills still came in the mail. Winter still blew cold through the cracks in the windows. The boy still spilled milk at breakfast, and the van still needed gas every week. But something had shifted. Something quiet and deep, like a root finally finding water after a long drought. He didn't waste the gift he'd been given. Every drop of gas in that van was used wisely, driving to work, picking up his son from school, helping an elderly neighbor haul firewood. He kept the van spotless, not out of pride, but out of respect. It wasn't just a vehicle. It was trust wrapped in steel and rubber. At the garage, things changed too. Not because he asked for it, but because people saw him differently. Not as the quiet guy in the corner, but as someone who'd carried his world on his shoulders and never complained. Apprentices started asking him for advice. Customers requested him by name. And when the garage owner offered him a small raise, for reliability, he said, he didn't argue. He just nodded and got back to work. But the biggest change wasn't in his job or his driveway. It was in how he moved through the world. Before, he'd kept to himself, thinking that asking for help meant weakness. Now he understood that real strength wasn't about doing everything alone. It was about knowing when to reach out and when to lend a hand. So he started showing up, not just for his son, but for others. When old Mrs. Langley's porch step broke, he fixed it on a Saturday morning, bringing his son along to hand him nails and hold the hammer. When the high school kid down the road couldn't afford new brakes for his first car, he stayed late at the garage and did the job for cost, just parts, no labor. "Pay it forward someday," he told the kid. And the boy's eyes lit up like he'd been handed a secret. He even started something small, a tool library. Just a locked cabinet in the garage where neighbors could borrow wrenches, jacks, or jumper cables, no fees. Just a notebook to sign your name and promise to return it. People laughed at first, then used it, then thanked him, then brought their own tools to add to it. His son noticed the change too. He'd always been proud of his dad, but now he walked a little taller at school. One day during show and tell, the teacher asked the class, "Who's someone you admire?" Most kids said superheroes or athletes. His son stood up, quiet at first, then clear. "My dad. He carried me home when our truck broke, and then everyone helped him." He says we're all supposed to help each other. The teacher later told him that half the class went home and asked their parents how they could help someone that week. Spring came, soft and slow. The fields turned green. The boy started riding his bike down the driveway without training wheels, wobbling at first, then steady. He'd pedal to the end of the road and back, waving at passing cars like he owned the place. His dad watched from the porch, coffee in hand, smiling in a way that reached his eyes now. One Saturday, they hosted a small gathering, not a party, just a backyard cookout. Folks brought burgers, potato salad, lawn chairs. Kids ran through the sprinkler. Someone brought a guitar and played old songs no one knew all the words to, but everyone sang anyway. It wasn't fancy, just people sharing time. As the sun dipped low, the garage owner pulled him aside. "You know," he said, "that van wasn't the only thing that changed that day." "What do you mean?" "Before you were just a good mechanic, now you're the kind of person people look to when things fall apart. Not because you've got all the answers, but because you show up." He didn't know what to say to that, so he just clapped the man on the shoulder and went back to flipping burgers. Over time, the story of the walk became part of the town's quiet history, not told for praise, but as a reminder. When someone was struggling, folks would say, "Remember that night on County 17? And that was enough. It meant we see you. We've got you." He never forgot the weight of his son on his shoulders that night, the cold, the fear, the miles stretching ahead. But now when he thought of it, he didn't feel alone. He felt surrounded by hands that reached out, by hearts that remembered, by a community that chose kindness over indifference, and he made sure his son understood that too. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies blink in the tall grass, the boy asked, "Dad, do you think we'll ever have to walk like that again?" He thought for a moment. "Maybe," he said honestly. "Life doesn't promise smooth roads. But now we know something important." "What's that?" "That we don't walk alone." The boy nodded like he already knew. Then he pointed to a firefly hovering near the fence. "Look, it's carrying its own light." "Yeah," his dad said softly. "And sometimes when one light shines, it helps others find their way." Years later, long after the boy had grown and moved away for college, people in town would still point to that house when driving by. "That's where it happened," they'd say. Not with drama, but with warmth. Not as a tragedy, but as a turning point. Because the truth was, the real miracle wasn't the van or the money or even the walk itself. It was the choice people made to notice, to care, to act. And the ripple of that choice kept moving, long after the engines had quieted and the driveway had emptied. He still worked at the garage, still lived in the same house, still fixed things, both broken and forgotten. But now, when a young parent came in looking tired and overwhelmed, he'd offer a cup of coffee and say, "Tell me what you need." Not because he had to, but because someone once did the same for him. And in the quiet moments when the shop was empty, and the tools were put away and the world felt heavy again, he'd remember that cold night, the small arms around his neck, and the morning his driveway filled with more than vehicles. It filled with hope. That was enough to keep him going. Always. The story, as most folks saw it, ended where it should have, with kindness repaid, a father and son safe, a community reminded of its own goodness. Life moved on as it does. Seasons turned, kids grew, trucks got older. The van that once sat gleaming with a red bow now had scratches on the bumper, a coffee stain on the driver's seat, and a dent near the back door from when the boy tried to parallel park for the first time. But stories like this don't really end. They just change shape. Years passed. The boy, no longer a boy but a young man with calloused hands and his father's quiet eyes, came home one summer after finishing trade school. He'd studied diesel mechanics just like his dad, but in a city 2 states away. He'd seen big shops, computer diagnostics, fleets of delivery vans humming under fluorescent lights. But when he stepped back onto the porch of that old house, duffel bag slung over his shoulder, he knew where he belonged. "I want to work with you," he said that night over beans and cornbread. His dad didn't say much, just nodded, poured him a glass of iced tea, and handed him a rag to wipe down the workbench the next morning. At first, the garage felt small to the young man. The tools were older, the bay doors creaked, and the radio only played 2 stations clearly. But he soon saw what he'd missed in the city. The way a farmer would bring in his tractor not just for repairs but to talk about the rain, or his grandkids, or the price of soybeans. The way a teenager would nervously ask if his first car was safe enough to drive his date to prom. The way people didn't just drop off a car, they dropped off trust. One afternoon, a woman pulled in with a sputtering sedan. Her son, maybe 7 or 8, sat in the passenger seat, clutching a stuffed rabbit. The engine died right at the bay door. She stepped out, shoulders tight, eyes tired. "It just stopped," she said, voice thin. "I don't know what's wrong. And I can't afford much." The young man looked at his dad. Without a word, his dad walked over, popped the hood, and started checking fluids. Then he turned to the boy. "Grab the multimeter from the red toolbox," he said. As they worked side by side, father testing the alternator, son checking spark plugs, the woman sat on an overturned bucket, watching them. Her son wandered over, curious. "Is my mom's car going to be okay?" he asked. "Yeah," the young man said, smiling. "We'll get her running." Later, when they found it was just a loose battery cable, something simple, something free to fix, the woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "I didn't know what I'd do if—" She didn't finish. She didn't have to. After she drove off, the young man stood in the bay, wiping grease off his hands. His dad came up beside him, silent for a long moment. "You remember that night?" his dad finally asked. "Which night?" "The walk," he nodded. Of course he remembered. Not every detail. Time had softened the edges, but he remembered the feeling. Safe even when things were hard. Carried, even when the world felt heavy. "I think about it more now that I'm older," he said. "Back then I just knew Dad was strong. Now I know. It wasn't just strength. It was love. And stubborn hope." His dad looked at him, really looked at him like he was seeing not just his son, but the man he'd become. "You carry that same hope," he said. The young man shook his head. "Nah, I just try to pay attention, like you taught me." And that was the real legacy, not the van, not the money, not even the story people told at potlucks. It was the habit of noticing, of seeing someone struggling and not looking away, of understanding that help doesn't always need to be grand. Sometimes it's just tightening a bolt, sharing a meal, or walking a mile so someone else doesn't have to. Word got around that the son was back. Soon more young folks started showing up, not just for repairs but to learn. The garage became a kind of classroom. On slow afternoons, the father and son would teach basic maintenance, how to check oil, change a tire, listen to what an engine is trying to say. No charge, just knowledge passed hand to hand. One Saturday, they hosted a fix-it day in the driveway. Neighbors brought lawnmowers, leaky faucets, wobbly chairs. Kids helped sort screws and washers. Someone brought a grill. Music played from a dusty speaker. It wasn't charity. It was community. People helping people like it used to be, like it should always be. An older man, new to town, watched from the edge of the yard. He'd lost his job last year. His truck was barely running. He hadn't asked for help, not yet. But seeing the way folks laughed while fixing things, the way no one was turned away, it gave him courage. He walked over, hesitant. "You think you could take a look at my radiator?" he asked. "It's been overheating." "Bring it by Monday," the young man said. "We'll get it sorted." The man nodded, relief washing over his face. As he turned to leave, the boy, the same one who'd once ridden on his father's shoulders, called out, "Hey, you like pie? My dad makes the best apple." The man smiled, really smiled for the first time in months. "Yeah," he said. "I do." That night, as father and son sat on the porch, the fireflies were out again. The same ones, maybe, or their great-great-grand fireflies. It didn't matter. They still carried their light. "You know," the young man said, "I used to think our story was about you carrying me. And now I think it's about all of us carrying each other." His dad didn't answer right away. He just watched the lights blink in the dark. Here, then gone, then here again. "Funny thing," he finally said. "The night I walked you home, I thought I was doing it alone. But turns out the whole town was walking with me. They just hadn't stepped out of the shadows yet." The young man leaned back in his chair. "Guess it's our turn to hold the light now."